Judge Marcus Reed was a name that commanded respect in the halls of justice. Known for his sharp mind, unwavering fairness, and deep commitment to the law, he had earned a reputation as one of the most trusted judges in the city. Every morning, Judge Reed would arrive at the courthouse dressed impeccably in his black robe, carrying with him not just legal briefs but also a sense of purpose. To those who knew him, he wasn't just a judge, he was a symbol of hope, especially for young people from underrepresented communities who dreamed of making a difference. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood, Marcus Reed grew up witnessing firsthand how inequality could shape lives. His father worked long hours as a factory worker, while his mother juggled multiple jobs to ensure their family stayed afloat. Despite their struggles, they instilled in Marcus the importance of education, hard work, and standing up for what was right. These values became the foundation of his life. After excelling in school and earning scholarships, Marcus pursued law with relentless determination. He graduated at the top of his class and quickly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a judge, a position he cherished deeply. Outside the courtroom, Marcus was more than just a figure of authority. He was a devoted father to his two children, Emma and Daniel, whom he often reminded to treat others with kindness and respect. On weekends, you could find him coaching Little League baseball or volunteering at community centers, where he mentored aspiring lawyers. Many looked up to him, not only because of his achievements but also because of his humility. He never forgot where he came from, and he made it a point to give back to the community that had shaped him. In the courtroom, Judge Reed's presence was calming yet commanding. Lawyers admired his ability to listen patiently before delivering well-reasoned decisions. Defendants, even those facing tough sentences, respected him because they felt heard. For many, appearing before Judge Reed wasn't just about receiving a verdict, it was about experiencing justice served with dignity. But beneath his calm exterior lay a quiet strength. Over the years, Marcus had faced subtle challenges due to the color of his skin, comments whispered behind closed doors, skeptical looks when he first stepped into courtrooms as a young lawyer. Yet he never let these moments define him. Instead, he used them as fuel to prove his worth. He believed that true change came not from anger, but from action, from showing the world what someone like him could achieve, despite the odds. One crisp autumn morning, as Judge Reed prepared to enter the courthouse, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The sun cast golden rays over the stone steps leading to the grand building, its pillars standing tall like sentinels of justice. Little did he know that this day would test everything he stood for, and force him to make a choice that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. As he approached the entrance, ready to begin another day of serving justice, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But sometimes the greatest storms arise without warning, challenging even the strongest foundations. And Judge Marcus Reed was about to face a storm unlike any he'd encountered before. This part sets the stage by introducing Judge Marcus Reed's character, his background and his values, creating a strong emotional connection with readers while keeping the tone engaging and relatable. Judge Marcus Reed reached the courthouse steps, his polished shoes clicking softly against the stone pavement. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of autumn leaves. As he approached the entrance, he noticed something unusual: a group of uniformed officers standing near the doors, their postures stiff and uninviting. At first, Marcus thought nothing of it. Security checks were common in such buildings, but as he drew closer, he realized that these officers weren't conducting routine inspections. They appeared to be blocking access. "Good morning, Judge," Reed said warmly, his voice calm but firm. He nodded politely at the officers, expecting them to step aside. After all, this was his workplace, a place where he had spent years ensuring fairness and upholding the law. Instead, one of the officers stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer said, his tone clipped. "You can't go in." Marcus blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Excuse me?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I'm Judge Marcus Reed. This is my courtroom." The officer hesitated for a brief moment before responding. "We've been instructed not to allow anyone through without proper clearance." "Proper clearance?" Marcus felt a flicker of confusion, and then disbelief. He carried his identification badge, his court schedule, and even his robe. What more could they possibly need? Determined to resolve the situation quickly, he reached into his pocket to pull out his credentials. But before he could hand them over, another officer interjected. "No need for that," the second officer said sharply, folding his arms across his chest. "Orders are orders." Something about the way they spoke and the way they avoided meeting his eyes sent an uneasy feeling creeping up Marcus's spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the underlying tone, the subtle implication that somehow he didn't belong here. For a moment he stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? Or was there something more sinister at play? Behind him, other people began to gather. Lawyers, clerks, and court staff arriving for the day. Some recognized Judge Reed and stopped in their tracks, surprised to see him standing outside instead of presiding over cases inside. A few exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay quiet. The atmosphere grew tense, charged with an unspoken tension that made everyone uneasy. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain composed. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. "May I ask who gave you these instructions?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing within him. The officers exchanged quick looks, clearly uncomfortable under his gaze. Finally, one of them muttered, "It came from above." "Above?" Marcus echoed, his patience beginning to wear thin. "Do you mean the Chief Justice? Because if so, I'd like to speak with him directly." Before the officers could respond, a murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This isn't right." Another added, "He's a judge, for goodness sake." The murmurs turned into soft protests, voices rising in support of Marcus. Yet the officers remained unmoved, their stance unwavering. For the first time in his career, Marcus felt a pang of doubt, not about himself, but about the system he had dedicated his life to, serving. How could this happen in a place meant to represent justice? And what message did it send to those watching? The young lawyers he mentored, the defendants who trusted the courts, the community that looked to him as a beacon of hope. As the standoff continued, Marcus knew he had to act. Standing idly by wasn't an option. With every passing second, the weight of the situation pressed down on him, urging him to find a solution. But how far was he willing to go to prove his worth, and to remind others of the values they seemed to have forgotten? Little did he know, his response would leave everyone speechless and change the course of his life forever. This part builds suspense and highlights the injustice faced by Judge Reed, drawing readers deeper into the story while maintaining emotional engagement. As the murmurs of protest grew louder among the crowd, Judge Marcus Reed felt a mix of emotions swirling within him: anger, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. He had always believed in the power of dialogue and resolving conflicts with calm reasoning. But now, standing face to face with officers who refused to budge, he realized that words alone might not be enough. "Let me make this clear," Marcus said, his voice firm but measured. "I am Judge Marcus Reed, appointed by the court to serve justice. I have every right to enter this building and fulfill my duties. If there's been some mistake, I'd appreciate it if you'd clarify immediately." The lead officer shifted, uncomfortably avoiding eye contact. "Sir, we're just following orders," he repeated, his tone tinged with unease. It was as though even he didn't fully believe what he was saying. Marcus studied the man's expression carefully. There was something hesitant in his demeanor, as if he wasn't entirely convinced of the legitimacy of the situation either. Perhaps these officers weren't the real decision-makers here. Someone higher up must have orchestrated this, a thought that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Who would dare interfere with the workings of the judiciary, and why target him specifically? Behind him, the crowd began to grow restless. Lawyers whispered urgently among themselves, while court staff looked on in shock. A young paralegal stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, is there anything we can do? This isn't right." Marcus turned to her briefly, offering a small, reassuring smile despite the turmoil inside him. "Thank you for your concern," he said softly, "but let's handle this calmly." Turning back to the officers, he added, "If no one here can explain the situation, then I'll take my concerns directly to the Chief Justice." At those words, the second officer stiffened visibly. "You won't get far with that," he muttered under his breath, almost too quietly for anyone to hear. "What did you say?" Marcus asked sharply, his patience wearing thin. The officer hesitated before replying. "Nothing, sir, just stating facts." "Facts? What facts could justify barring a sitting judge from entering his own courtroom?" Marcus clenched his fists momentarily, fighting the urge to demand answers more forcefully. Instead, he decided to try another approach, one rooted in dignity and composure. He pulled out his phone and dialed the office of the Chief Justice. As the call connected, he moved a few steps away from the officers, ensuring they couldn't overhear his conversation. On the other end of the line, the secretary answered politely, clearly surprised to hear from Judge Reed so early in the day. "Good morning," Marcus began, keeping his tone professional. "I'm outside the courthouse and seem to be encountering some difficulty gaining entry. Could you please confirm whether there has been any change in protocol or instructions regarding access?" There was a pause on the other end. "Judge Reed, I assure you, there hasn't been any directive issued about restricted access," the secretary replied, sounding genuinely confused. "Let me check further and get back to you." Marcus ended the call feeling both vindicated and unsettled. If the Chief Justice's office hadn't authorized this blockade, then who had? And why were these officers so insistent on preventing him from entering? Returning to the group, Marcus addressed the officers once again. "I've spoken with the Chief Justice's office, and they confirm there are no such restrictions in place. Now, unless you can provide valid reasons for keeping me out, I expect you to step aside." For a moment, the officers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering. Then, without warning, the lead officer spoke into his radio, muttering something indistinct. Moments later, a black sedan pulled up near the entrance, its windows tinted dark. The car door opened and a tall, well-dressed man stepped out, someone Marcus recognized instantly. It was Councilman Harris, a prominent figure known for his controversial views and influence over local politics. Seeing him there sent a jolt through Marcus's mind. Why was Harris involved in this? And what role did he play in orchestrating this bizarre scene? Harris approached with a smug smile, his presence commanding attention. "Judge Reed," he said smoothly, extending a hand that Marcus ignored. "I heard there was a bit of a misunderstanding. Allow me to clear things up." A knot tightened in Marcus's chest. Whatever Harris had to say, it wouldn't be good news. But Marcus stood tall, ready to face whatever came next, with courage, integrity, and unwavering resolve. This part escalates the tension by introducing a new character and deepening the mystery, keeping readers engaged while highlighting Judge Reed's determination and composure. Councilman Harris adjusted his tie as he stepped closer to Judge Marcus Reed, his polished shoes clicking against the stone steps of the courthouse. His smile was calm, almost too calm, masking whatever intentions lay beneath. The crowd around them fell silent, their eyes darting between the two men. Marcus, standing resolute, and Harris exuding an air of authority that seemed out of place. "Judge Reed," Harris began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "I understand this must be frustrating for you, but sometimes even the most respected individuals find themselves caught in misunderstandings." Marcus's jaw tightened at the word misunderstandings. He didn't trust Harris, not after years of hearing about his divisive rhetoric and questionable policies. Still, he kept his tone steady. "Councilman, I appreciate your attempt to mediate, but I fail to see how this situation qualifies as a misunderstanding. I am here to perform my duties, and these officers have unjustly barred me from entering. That is not a misunderstanding. It's an obstruction of justice." Harris raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Obstruction of justice? Such strong words, Your Honor. Surely we can resolve this without resorting to accusations." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the growing audience before continuing. Let's not forget, judges are public servants just like everyone else. Public trust is earned through transparency and accountability. The implication was clear, though subtly veiled. Marcus felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay composed. Are you suggesting that I lack transparency or accountability? He asked, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Harris chuckled lightly, brushing off the question with a dismissive wave of his hand. Not at all, Judge Reed. What I'm saying is that appearances matter. Perception shapes reality. And unfortunately, certain perceptions have arisen regarding your recent rulings. Marcus frowned, his mind racing. Over the past few months, he had presided over several high-profile cases involving civil rights violations and discrimination claims. In each instance, he had ruled based on evidence and the law, ensuring fairness for all parties involved. Yet, it seemed those decisions hadn't sat well with some powerful figures, including Harris. You're referring to my rulings, aren't you? Marcus said, his tone sharp now. Cases where I upheld the rights of marginalized communities? Is that what this is really about? Harris's smile faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. Don't put words in my mouth, Judge. All I'm saying is that when judges make decisions that polarize opinions, it creates challenges. Challenges that ripple beyond the courtroom and into the community. Marcus took a step forward, his presence commanding despite the odds stacked against him. And what exactly are you proposing, Councilman? That I compromise my principles to avoid ruffling feathers? That I bend the law to suit the preferences of those in power? The crowd murmured in agreement, sensing the gravity of the moment. Lawyers exchanged nods, while court staff whispered words of encouragement to one another. Even the officers shifted uncomfortably as if they wished they were anywhere else. Harris leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. No one's asking you to compromise anything, Judge, just exercise discretion. Sometimes it's better to choose battles wisely. Marcus stared at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly he straightened his shoulders and addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, let me make one thing perfectly clear. Justice is blind. It doesn't see color, wealth, or influence. My duty is to uphold the law without fear or favor. If anyone believes otherwise, then they misunderstand the very essence of what it means to serve this country. Turning back to Harris, Marcus added, Councilman, I will not be intimidated. You may try to block my path today, but know this. I will walk through those doors and I will fulfill my responsibilities, because that is what I swore to do. With that, Marcus turned and walked toward the courthouse entrance, his head held high. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the crisp morning air. Behind him, Harris stood frozen, his smug demeanor replaced by thinly veiled frustration. But Marcus knew this wasn't over. Far from it. This confrontation was only the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test not only his resolve but also the integrity of the system he had sworn to protect. This part deepens the conflict by exposing Harris's motives and showcasing Marcus's unwavering commitment to justice, leaving readers eager to see how the story unfolds. As Judge Marcus Reed approached the courthouse doors once again, the crowd's applause bolstered his spirit. The officers who had previously blocked him now hesitated, their earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Some glanced nervously at Councilman Harris, unsure whether to enforce his unspoken orders or yield to the growing tide of support for Marcus. Harris, standing a few paces away, clenched his fists briefly before forcing a tight smile onto his face. Judge Reed, he called out, his voice louder this time, laced with a mix of irritation and desperation. You're making a scene. Is that really necessary? Marcus stopped mid-step and turned to face him. His expression was calm but firm, like a storm brewing beneath a serene sky. Councilman, he replied evenly, justice has always been a public matter. If shining a light on wrongdoing makes people uncomfortable, then so be it. Transparency is not something I shy away from. It's what I stand for. The crowd erupted into cheers again, their voices echoing off the courthouse walls. Lawyers clapped enthusiastically, while court clerks exchanged proud smiles. Even some of the officers seemed to relax slightly, as if relieved that someone finally stood up to Harris's manipulative tactics. But Harris wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "You think this little display changes anything? You're just one man, Reed. One man against an entire system. Do you really believe you can win?" Marcus met his gaze squarely, his dark eyes filled with quiet determination. "I don't need to win, Councilman. My job isn't about winning or losing, it's about doing what's right. And if standing up for justice means challenging people like you, then so be it. History remembers those who fight for fairness, not those who suppress it." For a fleeting moment, Harris looked shaken. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, unable to find the words. Instead, he straightened his tie and took a step back, his usual bravado fading into uncertainty. Seizing the moment, Marcus turned back to the crowd. "Friends, colleagues, fellow citizens," he began, his voice carrying over the murmurs of approval. "This morning I walked up these steps expecting nothing more than to fulfill my duties as a judge, but instead, I encountered an obstacle, an attempt to silence me because of the principles I uphold." He paused, letting his words sink in. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. "What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about whether we allow fear and prejudice to dictate how our laws are carried out, or whether we demand accountability and fairness." A young lawyer in the crowd raised her hand timidly. "Your Honor, what can we do? How can we help?" Marcus smiled warmly at her, grateful for the solidarity. "Speak up," he said simply. "Use your voices. Share what happened here today. Justice thrives when people refuse to stay silent. Together we can ensure that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." His words resonated deeply, igniting a spark among those gathered. Phones were pulled out, videos recorded, messages sent. Within minutes, news of the confrontation began spreading across social media platforms, drawing attention from local journalists and activists alike. Meanwhile, Harris watched the scene unfold with mounting frustration. He signaled to the officers, whispering instructions under his breath. Reluctantly, they stepped aside, clearing a path for Marcus to enter the courthouse. As Marcus walked through the doors, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause once more, their cheers reverberating through the halls. Inside, Marcus paused for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings of the courthouse. Despite the chaos outside, the building remained a sanctuary, a place where truth and fairness were meant to prevail. He knew the battle wasn't over. Harris would undoubtedly try other tactics to undermine him. But for now, Marcus had taken a stand, and it had made all the difference. Little did he know this single act of defiance would inspire far-reaching change, galvanizing communities and sparking conversations about equality and justice that extended far beyond the courthouse walls. This part highlights Marcus's courage and leadership, showing how his actions inspire others while setting the stage for broader societal impact. By midday, the story of Judge Marcus Reed's confrontation at TR. The courthouse had spread like wildfire. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like Justice for All and Stand with Reed, as videos and posts capturing the morning's events went viral. Local news outlets scrambled to cover the incident, interviewing witnesses and airing footage that showcased Marcus's calm yet resolute demeanor. The image of a respected judge standing up against perceived injustice struck a chord with people from all walks of life. In neighborhoods across the city, conversations erupted around dinner tables, in coffee shops, and on street corners. Parents used the story to teach their children about integrity and courage. Young activists saw Marcus as a symbol of resistance against systemic bias. Even those who typically stayed out of political discussions found themselves drawn into debates about fairness, equality, and the role of power in shaping society. At the heart of it all was Marcus himself, who remained steadfast despite the growing attention. Back in his courtroom, he presided over cases with the same level-headedness and dedication he always had. But there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Lawyers greeted him with renewed respect, court staff offered warm smiles, and defendants listened intently to his rulings, knowing they were being judged by someone who truly believed in justice. Outside the courthouse, however, tension simmered. Councilman Harris fumed behind closed doors, pacing his office as he watched the news coverage unfold. His phone rang incessantly with calls from allies and adversaries alike, each wanting to weigh in on the situation. Some urged him to issue a public apology. Others advised doubling down on his stance. Harris knew he couldn't ignore the backlash forever, but neither could he admit defeat. "What do you suggest I do?" Harris barked into the phone during one particularly heated call. "The whole city's turned against me." On the other end of the line, his advisor sighed audibly. "Sir, you need to pivot. Frame this as a misunderstanding, a bureaucratic error. Distance yourself before it gets worse." Harris reluctantly agreed, drafting a carefully worded statement blaming the officers for misinterpreting orders. He claimed no personal involvement and expressed regret for any inconvenience caused. It was a weak attempt at damage control, but it was all he had left. Meanwhile, Marcus received messages of support from unexpected quarters. Prominent figures in the legal community reached out to commend his actions, while grassroots organizations invited him to speak at rallies, advocating for reform. Though flattered, Marcus declined most invitations, preferring to focus on his work. "My place is in the courtroom," he told one organizer politely. "But if my actions inspire others to fight for change, then that's more than enough." Still, the ripple effects of his stand continued to grow. Community leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss systemic issues within the justice system. Students at local universities held panel discussions featuring lawyers, professors, and activists, using Marcus's story as a starting point for broader conversations. Even some politicians began calling for investigations into potential biases within law enforcement agencies. As days turned into weeks, Marcus noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted with him. Strangers approached him on the street to shake his hand or thank him for standing up for what was right. Colleagues who had once kept their distance now sought his advice or simply wanted to express admiration. Through it all, Marcus remained humble, reminding everyone that he was just doing his job. But beneath his composed exterior, Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility. He knew the momentum sparked by his actions wouldn't last forever. Real change required sustained effort, and he was determined to play his part. One evening, as he sat alone in his study reviewing case files, Marcus reflected on everything that had transpired. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Powerful forces would continue to push back, testing his resolve. Yet he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. A movement had begun, one rooted in hope, unity, and the belief that justice could prevail, and Marcus was ready to lead it. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple effects of Judge Marcus Reed's stand at the courthouse continued to grow stronger. What had started as a single act of defiance had blossomed into a movement, a citywide awakening that demanded accountability, fairness, and reform. For Marcus, life became a delicate balancing act between his duties in the courtroom and his newfound role as an inadvertent figurehead for change. Every morning he arrived at the courthouse to find supporters waiting outside, some holding signs that read, "Justice knows no color," or "Courage inspires us all." They weren't there to protest. They simply wanted to show their gratitude. Marcus greeted them warmly, taking time to shake hands and exchange words of encouragement. He knew these moments mattered, not just for him, but for everyone who needed a reminder that progress was possible. Inside the courtroom, Marcus carried on with his work, ensuring every case received the attention it deserved. But something had shifted. Lawyers presented arguments more thoughtfully, knowing their words would be weighed against the principles Marcus represented. Defendants listened intently, often leaving the courtroom with a renewed sense of hope, even if the verdict didn't go their way. Justice, Marcus believed, wasn't just about outcomes. It was about being heard, understood, and treated fairly. Outside the courthouse, the movement gained momentum. Community organizations held workshops to educate people about their legal rights. Schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility and equality into their curriculums. Even local businesses pledged to support initiatives aimed at bridging divides within the community. The once muted voices of marginalized groups grew louder, demanding representation and respect. Councilman Harris, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. His attempts to downplay his involvement in the courthouse incident only fueled further skepticism. Investigations were launched into allegations of misconduct within his office, uncovering practices that many considered discriminatory. Though Harris tried to defend himself, public opinion had turned against him. Eventually, under mounting pressure, he resigned from his position, leaving behind a fractured legacy. For Marcus, Harris's fall wasn't a cause for celebration. It was a sobering reminder of the power dynamics at play. "This isn't about one person winning or losing," he told a reporter during a rare interview. "It's about creating a system where everyone is treated equally. That's the goal we should all strive for." As the year drew to a close, Marcus received an unexpected invitation to deliver a keynote speech at a national conference on justice reform. Standing before an audience of thousands, he spoke not of himself, but of the collective effort required to build a better future. "Change doesn't happen because of one moment or one person," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It happens when ordinary people come together to demand extraordinary things. Let us continue to stand up, speak out, and work toward a world where justice truly belongs to all." The applause that followed was deafening, lasting long after Marcus stepped off the stage. Back home, his children hugged him tightly, proud of the man they called Dad. His wife smiled knowingly, seeing the fulfillment in his eyes. Though challenges remained, Marcus felt hopeful. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Together, step by step, communities were building a foundation rooted in fairness, integrity, and unity. And Judge Marcus Reed, once just a humble servant of the law, had become a beacon of light guiding the way. This final part wraps up the story by emphasizing the lasting impact of Marcus's actions, highlighting both personal growth and societal transformation, while leaving readers inspired and hopeful.